Here's Brody Brazil.
So this is it, my 2021-22 San Jose Sharks preview, and this is going to be an interesting and important season because the last few years, you see where this team has been. 18 into 19, of course, that was the year they shocked the world against Las Vegas in Game 7, and then obviously round 2 and 3 is where the season ended in the Western Final against St. Louis. They went all the way to the Stanley Cup. But 2019 into 20, they played 70 games. It's important to remember this was a normal season for the league in that things were going fine until the pandemic. As for the Sharks, you recall that December of 19 is when they changed head coaches. Pete DeBoer was dismissed of his duties, and Bob Boughner came in, and that was kind of the rest of a transitional season. Definitely a transitional season. And that brings us into last year, 65 games, so many restrictions, so many things about last year that just made it a totally different experience. Now, 49 points in those games. I'm not here to make excuses. I'm not here to point the finger, blame. I mean, it was a really rough campaign, but let's also remember how it started for this team, what it was like for this team, what it was like for pretty much every NHL team. I cannot sit here and tell you that you should put too much stock into everything you saw last year, the way it played out, and also the way things were behind the scenes. But the bigger picture here for the Sharks, looking back at these last few seasons, 101 points in those 82 games of 18-19, 63 points in 70 games, and then 49 points in 56 games last year. I mean, literally the Sharks had about as many points in 82 games as they have in their last 115 or so, 120. You can see where in regular seasons where they've fallen away from their mark. But the most important thing to know is that this team, this franchise, has never missed the playoffs 3 straight seasons. I mean, and this is going all the way back, obviously, to the early 90s, through expansion, through rough patches. This just goes to show you that they are in one of the most pivotal times right now in franchise history in terms of making the playoffs. And I realize that for some people and across really the entire 2010s, that was an expectation. I mean, there were so many opening nights for the Sharks where as soon as the puck got dropped, it meant they were basically in the playoffs. You could bank them for high 90s, low hundreds in the points, probably winning the division, if not being a pretty high seed in the Pacific or in the West. I mean, we look back now, and they had great teams, but I think you realize that it's easy to be taking that for granted at the time when it's happening. But now that we're on the opposite end, yeah, and when I say they haven't made the playoffs each of the last 2 years, yeah, one season ended after 70 games, but they were well out of it. And last year, the abbreviated season and realignment with different divisions and travel was different. You only playing teams in your division. Yes, it was abnormal, very much so. But the bottom line is they were still not one of the better teams. They were not one of the upper half teams in the league to get into the playoffs. So they've never missed these Stanley Cup playoffs 3 years straight. And I think that brings you to the number one goal for this team. Now, despite what you'll hear, despite what players will tell you, despite what the organization ultimately shoots for, we know you shoot for the Stanley Cup every single season. We know that you go after players that way. We know that you market the opportunity that way. That's it. And that should be the ultimate goal. I think about anybody in their individual profession. Let's say you're a broadcaster and your goal is to host the Emmys. Well, that's great. That's the Stanley Cup, I suppose. But before you do that, I mean, there have to be other steps to get you to that ultimate goal. And I'm saying here, you can still shoot for the Stanley Cup. Keep that goal. But your primary thing this season has to be simply getting back to the playoffs. I'm not even saying turn the ship around. I'm not even saying make steps forward this year. I'm saying that the number one goal, it has to be getting to the playoffs. Playoffs or bust. And that's harsh. What do I mean by bust? I don't even know. It's just a phrase. It's a term of speech. But it really has to be that for this hockey club. Just get back to the playoffs. Punch your ticket, see what happens. And honestly, no matter what happens in a playoff situation, if the Sharks are there in late April, early May of 2022, that in itself will have been an accomplishment based on where they've been, some of the things they've been going through. I don't think there's any argument against that. So let's get into some of the biggest themes for this team in this upcoming season. And looking back across the last several years, pretty easy to see that whether it was team defense or whether it was goaltending alone, or honestly, it was probably the combination of both, across the last 3 years, this is the area where the team has depleted most. And we can talk about scoring, and we'll talk about the power play definitely here in just a second. But defense is the one thing, unlike offense and unlike scoring, defense should not slump. It's fine if your offense slumps. Every team has it. Every team gets snake bit. Every team has a couple players that go through it. Every team has games and periods where they just cannot find the back of the net. And the chances are there, the power plays are there, and they just can't do it. But defense should not slump. Now, they have a fresh slate in the crease. I was scared to hear about Adin Hill the other day, had to come off the ice during practice. Apparently got hit with a puck in the wrist. And apparently things are going to be fine, still on target. I would estimate he's probably the guy for opening night. And I'm not saying that James Reimer makes this an easy conversation or decision. It's great to have the veteran presence of James Reimer back in San Jose. We only knew him for a brief period of time in 26, right before the trade deadline. He was the backup for Martin Jones. He was kind of the safety net, the parachute, if you will. Wasn't needed all the way to the Stanley Cup final. But it was a great security to have him kind of around and if need be. By the way, James Reimer, I didn't know this. Kind of like me, a total aviation geek. Apparently during the bubble playoffs of 2020, he took a flight sim like control wheel, like a control yoke for an airplane. He took that with him into the bubble so that he could play flight sim. We got to talk about this. We got to do something with James Reimer on that. Anyway, back to hockey. I digress. To have those two alone, I like the idea of a fresh slate. Best of luck to Devin Dubnyk. I mean, even going back now to Aaron Dell and obviously to Martin Jones in Philadelphia. I think all three of them are capable absolutely in what they do next. But sometimes the team just needs fresh blood and a new look. Because this combination, and I firmly believe, if you go back to 18-19 and kind of the start of this into 19-20, the start of this was team defense not making goalies look good. It's my last point here. Odd man rushes and net front chances and situations where the goalies were hung out to dry. It's one thing to ask your goalie to make 5 incredible stops a night. Hopefully they make at least 4. But when you're asking them to make 7 to 9 to double-digit amazing saves because, well, the other team got a great scoring chance or, you had a turnover that instantly came back on you. It's a 3-on-1, 2-on-none. Like, what do you expect to happen? But I'll be honest, I really feel like last season, the transition of problems went from team defense, which kind of still existed, and it bled into the goaltending. And all of a sudden, Dubnyk started strong, maybe didn't finish in the same respect, and Martin Jones honestly, it just really got away. It completely got away from him in a short season. And so, like I said, I'm glad that everybody has moved on. I'm glad for that. And one last thing, when I'm talking here about team defense, important to remember that we're not just talking about the defenseman. This is not just a blue line issue. Team defense literally means the entire team. It means forwards on their assignments. It means being responsible about turnovers, and when they happen, you're prepared to play instantly some defense. I know team defense has the word defense, which is similar to defenseman in it, but I just want to be very clear. What I think we've all seen is a breakdown from the entire team, all the skaters on the ice, and it's that skater-goalie relationship. I'll also throw this in there. It's similar to baseball in that pitchers have an ERA, an earned run average. Well, that's nice because it doesn't factor in if your shortstop makes an error and 2 or 3 runs score because of it, that does not go on the pitcher's ERA. But for a goalie, the save percentage and the goals against, I mean, they are reflective only if the goalie stopped the puck or how many got behind them in a given 60 minutes. And so the issue kind of here is that it doesn't tell you the full story of, well, yeah, they got beat, but like 3 players in front of them who should have been the first, second, and third lines of defense, they also got beat too. I'm not saying it's misleading for goalies, and I know there are other, team stats, but what everybody looks at for the goalies are save percentage and goals against. Those are individual stats, but they are composed in a team effort. And so 2 or fewer, right? Like we got to get back to a little 2 or fewer conversation here. That happens way not often enough. It's not 2 or less. Come on, we found that out a couple years ago. 2 or fewer. When the Sharks allow 2 or fewer goals, they pretty much win, 77 out of 78 times in a row, something like that. This, to me, is the main recipe. Like I said, we can talk power play in a second. We can talk about team chemistry. We can talk about veteran depth and presence and a third and fourth line, all of that stuff. Absolutely. But it's got to start with defense, and in tandem with that, goaltending has to be equally up to par. Okay, let's move on here. The power play. Will it have a new look? And when we say that, how different are we talking here? Because last season, they converted to the tune of 14.1%. That was 29th out of 31 NHL teams. By the way, how weird is it to say this year 32? I'm going to have to keep remembering the Kraken. But 32 is a nice even number. Anyway, why am I talking about this? 29th out of 31 teams last year, 14.1%. Obviously not going to cut it. And you know the old hockey math, right? You want to take your penalty kill percentage and your power play percentage, and if you add those 2 up, you're coming in at around 100%. Well, to do this, I mean, your PK needs to be 86%. And, that's very difficult. So the bottom line here is that 14.1%, not good enough. And it's not even the measure of converting on power plays for the Sharks. Wait, how could I say that? That's everything, right? The results in this are everything. And that is true. But there have been so many instances we've seen in the last season alone, where the Sharks get on the man advantage and they only generate a shot or no shots. I mean, it happened way too many times last year, and Randy Hahn would mention it. No shots on that power play for the Sharks. No shots on goal. That has to initially be the one thing that changes. Before you start talking about up in that percentage and trying to get it more like 18, 19, up into the 20% range, you got to start figuring out how every single time you're out there that you make the other team pay for their penalty that they took. Create momentum in those 2 minutes, and also create momentum in the 2 minutes following your power play. You hear that saying, so often. It was a power play influenced goal, because 10 seconds after they got their skater back out on the ice, they were still pooped. They didn't have time to make a change, and you scored on that very next or same shift. So that's the biggest thing for this team is yes, the end result, but getting away from no shots on the power play. I think there were even games last year where they had no shots for 2.5 power plays, like in a game in a row. They went on a sequence of basically 5 minutes on power plays and not getting any shots. So John McClain is in charge. Again, it was an interesting situation for him to join the team, and it was kind of last minute with an opening that happened due to health situations, let's call it. But I think a new set of eyes, new ideas, new implementation. And the bottom point here is what he talked about in his introductory press conference. And I have, Burns and Carlson numbered there, and whether they're together on a power play unit, whether they're separate on a 1 and 2 unit, do you go with a strong power play unit? Do you try and have that PP1 always be it for you, or do you try and make them equally stacked so you can start 2 and then go 1, or you can have different looks? Do you want Burns and Carlson on the points on your power play? How do you do it? That's all remaining to be seen in the regular season. But I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on this. I also think, too, McLean's point about taking over the power play on this team, and that is one of his responsibilities, is that there is plenty of talent with this group to get a way different result than 14.1%. Now, I'm not throwing anybody else in past seasons under the bus. That's not it. But like I said, let's be honest. You would think that the group and the roster that's there is well capable of a higher number than 14.1%. So on the total list of things, where does this stack of importance? It's probably top 3. There's no lie. Team defense and goaltending for me is number 1. This is probably 2 or 3. I really think the other thing that's just simply in the mix is team chemistry. And we'll get to more of that in just a second. But this is probably top 3 for me this season. Okay. This is obviously one of the biggest headlines surrounding this team and going into training camp. I think this is also going to be a headline going into the regular season. I don't expect anything to change. And I want to preface everything I'm about to say here by telling you that I'm probably not going to say what you think or as much as you want or as much as certainly other people are talking about this situation, because it's so complicated. It's so difficult. It's also so professional, but it's also so personal. And out of respect to individuals, children, the process, I'm not diving deep into the personal side of this. These are serious allegations, and because of that, these are serious situations. There are multiple different things here going on in sequence, and I think the bottom line is if you're sitting here saying, well, you just want to rush it through, you want to get this done, I think that's probably human nature, and clearly if you're a fan of just this team, of course that would benefit the team. But I think the responsible human thing to realize is that you want these things to take as much time as just they absolutely need to get it right, to get things right, what happened right, solutions right. I don't know how else and how better to say it, because I truly want resolutions for all on so many different fronts here. You know what we're talking about. Clearly, Evander has had the gambling issue, and again, there are personal issues at home. There are issues reportedly, as we've seen plenty of times over the summer, with teammates, with the coaching staff at some point. So again, leaving all of this stuff, I'm only stating the obvious here. It's only easy to want resolutions here in time, but honestly realizing that if this is a team preview that we're talking about here, he was their best player last season. There's no question about that. Had one of his best NHL seasons. Yeah, it was condensed, it was shortened, but if you look at the body of work and you pan that out across 82 games, yeah, it was impressive and it was important. And does this team look a lot different without number 9 out there? Absolutely. I think you could go into filling a gap on the ice. You could go into filling a gap in terms of the salary cap. There's a lot of different things to unpack here. And again, that's about as far as I'm taking this. I really am, because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't want to predict it. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I certainly have no more information than any of you do. These are legitimate, investigations going on into certain things that have happened. And right now the team, and let me just say this, one more thing. I heard a lot of players rightfully asked about the situation, if they had any comment, how they put this. It's the nature of, being a person, a teammate in this situation. You knew those questions were going to be asked, and nobody really said anything about it. And my thought on that is, again, I understand why those questions are being presented, but I did not expect anything in return, and quite honestly, we got nothing in return from teammates, and that's probably the proper thing to do. Same with me, given the situation, not going too deep into anything because we don't know. But I do want to go one step deeper on this because it quite honestly is the only area that I even feel qualified to talk about, and that is, with or without Evander Kane, there's a huge question here of what does the team look like without him? I think we made that point. But what does the team look like with him? Hypothetically. We get beyond this at some point. And that's, even I feel guilty saying that. We get beyond, we get resolutions. If there are resolutions here, and he is part of the team at some point, heck, we're October 4th here, is not even with him. We're a dozen days away from opening night, so who knows how long this goes. But, in order to maybe resolve and bridge some of the gaps that existed between he and teammates, I just want to say this. It's going to take work. I don't think that that's a situation where you just show up and everything's instantly fine and we forget about it and we don't talk about it. Again, this is me not telling you new information. I think this is something everybody can relate to in their personal life. When there is a disagreement, two sides are in conflict, teammates here. How do you resolve it? It just takes work from both sides. It can't just work from one side and the other side flies along, or this side works at it and the other side doesn't care, and it really takes two sides coming together here. So I just want to point that out. Who knows the depths of that and what that would be like if he rejoins the team. But I do want to point out that it does seem like there has to be the next steps of effort on Evander's side and on teammates' side. And if they really want it to work, and I don't mean to pretend here that or imply that that's not possible. I'm just simply stating that it's going to take some work to get there. Okay. More of a veteran presence, I think, is definitely a theme for this team. It's something they've absolutely needed each of the last 2 years. And you could pick and choose different spots here. Sometimes I do feel like their blue line in the last 2 seasons of no playoffs, I feel like they've been fairly established. There have been times with injuries and respective this and that. Maybe they're a defenseman, like a real solid defenseman shy of having a nice, 6-man core. But I feel like the forwards are the areas where San Jose has been a little bit shorthanded in the last 2 seasons. And on the third line, on the fourth line, and what you're looking for this team with a veteran presence and with additions like Cogliano and Bonino is consistent efforts, known commodities. It's right there on your screen. You want to know on a nightly basis what you're going to get from, a Bonino at third line center and a Cogliano in those roles, or quite honestly, any other player that you bring up and put in these situations. The same would hold true for William Eklund. Oh, and we'll talk about him in just a second too. But this is an area that has not been this way for the Sharks the last 2 years because there have been so many Barracuda players on this team getting great opportunities, getting great looks. But I don't, honestly, with the exception of Knizhov and John Leonard, Barabanov, and I've named a few, don't get me wrong, but there haven't been many players who have come up, made a first splash, made a first impression, hung on to it, and latched. The NHL is a lot like every other sport in that it's hard to break in. It's hard. But it is way harder to stay doing what you're doing, keep that role, win that role, and stay there. And that's something I think we've witnessed with Shark players in the last handful of years. There just have not been enough that come up, like I said, make the impact, but also persist. And you know that they're not going back. They're not going back to the AHL or anywhere else. And so that has been, and it goes twofold, right? Because the Sharks did see last year as an opportunity to test young players, to give them more opportunities so that a year like this comes around, a normal 82 games, And hey, you've got even more guys who, when they come up, it's not a big a deal anymore. But it's also important to not bring players up too often and too early. They get overexposed, they lose their confidence. I said this before, it's almost like barbecuing something. Like sometimes if you pull the meat off the grill too early, it's not ready. It's got to go back on the grill a little bit. And you wouldn't want to eat it if it's not ready. And kind of the same goes with athletes and the minor leagues versus the ultimate professional league. So they need more known commodities, again, especially up front. I think those two additions I talked about are greatly going to improve that. But I also think when you want more of a veteran presence, you really need to rely on your veterans of this team. I'm talking about Logan. I'm talking about Bernsey, Carlson, Vlasic, Hurdle, Timo Meier. I mean, this is a young man still, but let's call him a veteran at this point. He's been through this song and dance several times over now. He's seen, several rounds of the playoffs. He knows what this is all about. So I don't think it's fair to say, well, you don't want to see less young guys getting chances. I mean, in a perfect world, those chances are harder to come by. But at the same respect, they're harder to come by because you pretty much know what you're going to get from the guys who have been around the block a few times. So I want to make that very clear that a bigger veteran presence is going to help this team, but that means you need more from your veterans, and you also need players that either are young and come in and establish like veterans, or maybe you need to go out and acquire more veteran players. That to me has definitely been a theme. And why do I say all this? You just need to know what you're going to get on a regular basis. What kind of output, what kind of results are you going to get from your players? All right. You know what? This is a global story of the San Jose Sharks. Over in Sweden, they are really interested in how this is going to play out. What is going to be the season status of currently 18-year-old, but by the time opening night comes around, 19-year-old William Eklund. Now, just a quick backstory. When he got drafted 7th overall this past summer, there's no doubt the Sharks were surprised that he was still available to be taken. I think he was well off, not off their radar, but well off their expectations. They didn't think they were going to have a chance of drafting Eklund. Turns out he was there, took him in a heartbeat, and they were very happy with that. I know a lot of people, after the draft was over, talked about how big the Sharks won is it luck that you were there in that spot? Yeah, the 7th pick. It's not like a top 3 pick, not even a top 5 pick, but they thought the Sharks, in a lot of ways, won this pick and the draft entirely, all the players they took, but especially getting Eklund 7th overall. Now, there's been a lot of talk lately. Can he make the team? And as training camp has started and as preseason games have happened and as people get to see more of him and understand what he's all about. Have you watched his interviews, by the way? There are some of them here on my YouTube channel. Phenomenal composure, maturity for an 18-year-old. Are you serious? He's better put together than a lot of 30-year-olds are. Now, he looks young, but put it on, or not put it on mute. Don't look at the screen and just listen to what he says and the way he talks and the way he answers questions. I mean, yes, some of it looks like a teenager, but my goodness, he is well ahead of the curve. That's all off the ice. The fact that he is of the Vlasic / Marlowe talent at that age, you know what I'm talking about. He might be able to break into the NHL this opening night in 12 days. This rarely happens in the NHL. You always draft a player to then go to the AHL or some other, team across North America or even in Europe, so that they can continue developing, but now they are one of your prospects. This is so rare that he might be drafted a couple months ago. Was it June was the draft? I can't even remember. June or July? Sorry, I was in baseball mode. And here we are, basically 3 months later, and he's on an opening night roster. I think, from what I understand, what I've heard, observed, have you seen the highlights, by the way? This kid's amazing with the puck. So it's possible. It is great overall. Let's take a step back here. How great is it that even if he doesn't make it, that the Sharks pipeline is like this again. That there's somebody like this coming around sooner than later. The fact that he is in the mix is awesome. It's honestly, it's been a while since there has, and part of it is the Sharks' success. Success gets you low draft picks. Low draft picks doesn't get you a William Eklund earlier on. But herein lies, I'm telling you, a theme of the season. We're going to be watching him no matter where he ends up to start, no matter where he goes next, and if there's a next stop after that. We're going to be watching him way closer than we have a lot of other Sharks prospects over the years, because like they talked about going back to Sweden, playing on the larger ice surface that he was used to. And it's a difficult league. It's a tough league, but he's already been playing there. Do you just want him to get more of that? The other idea would be play in the AHL. Before you do the NHL thing, at least get used to the North American rink, which, by the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about, much smaller. First time I ever saw the international rink, and the Sharks played on it in a preseason game against a German team. This is like 2010. Anyway, long story short, the game is so different because a lot of times the German team would literally always take the outside against the Shark players because the Sharks players were ready to edge them out on the wall, and they realized, well, the wall's another 10 feet to my left or my right. I was planning to throw a hip check right here, but I can't because he'll just get right around me. So anyway, point being that the game, it just plays a lot different, especially for a winger when the rink is a lot more narrow in the NHL. So, but is that part of it? Is he just that close and not ready? Do you not want to put a ton of pressure on him? Do you want to start him with the Barracuda? How does this go? The same lies true for any other young player. If you bring him up too fast, what do you risk? Is there a risk in that? Do you have a game plan? Are we going to say, hey, 10 games, 20 games, whatever, let's see how it goes. We'll make a decision there. And that's fine too. All I'm saying is that we will watch his every move and his every placement this year. And we might overthink it. I'm not going to lie. We'll be considering, like, is this the best path? What does this lead to next? And optimally, maybe he just starts up with the Sharks. Maybe he latches. Maybe, he's on a line that works, and that's it. And that's the end of the story. But the point is here, the last thing is the Sharks just have to get this right. Like a 7th overall pick that could have been a top 3 pick that they got their hands on, and they're trying to build for, now moving forward. He's obviously a huge part of that. You got to get this right. What is that? What does right mean? I don't know. That's for smart people like Doug Wilson to figure out. And honestly, Bob Bugner talked about it too. What roles, who's going to make the team? Like, the players will decide this, right? How they look, how they perform under a little bit of pressure. But I think the Sharks have to help the situation out, help William Eklund get it right. All right, what's next? Schedule oddities. That's definitely a big theme early on of this season because you have a trio of 5-game road trips, I think between October, early and late November. I mean, literally before December, you've already been on, huge 5-game roadies. Those are usually like 1 a season, maybe 2, and stretched out over months, but 3 of them really early on here. And there's also this oddity. The Sharks are playing, some Western teams, a lot of Eastern teams. A couple of those early 5-game trips are out East, but the Sharks will only play 2 Pacific Division opponents by December 9th. And actually, I take that back. It's Calgary in both of those games, one in late November and one there on December 9th. So how does that work? On December 9th, the Sharks will have played Calgary twice, and they will still have yet to face any other Pacific Division opponent. I don't know what that means. I'm not going to try and overanalyze that. I know by the end of 82 games, it all plays out the same anyway. Kind of, because there are some differences in this year's schedule too. But it's odd at first. You're going to see Sharks and Jets a couple times, Sharks and Montreal a couple times. I think the Sharks played the Islanders like well before December 1st twice, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, the schedule does get quite busy in November and in the month of April. Now, this is still a condensed NHL schedule. Usually opening night would be like tomorrow or the next night, the 4th or 5th or 6th, early October, first week usually of October. This year, for whatever reason, and maybe it has a little bit to do with how late last year finished, but this year it's October 16th for the Sharks. And the season goes all the way until late April, and part of that is because of what the Sharks will have is a 3-week Olympic break, first 3 weeks of the month of February. So that's when the NHL is going to shut down entirely. I'm excited to see that. I'm happy that, the owners have got it together. From what it sounds like, everything's going to work just fine. It is a large risk. I mean, you're the primary employer of these star players that are all going to be going to Asia and participating in the Olympics. And, hopefully COVID has subsided significantly, so that's much less of a concern by February, I hope. But obviously the other injuries, which have always been a question mark and a concern for owners, do you really want to have them playing these games? Not necessarily on your dime, but at your risk. But that being said, me as a spectator, I like the players too. I want what the players want, and they want this opportunity, and they didn't get to go in 2014. So, I definitely want that for them. No, did I say 14? Did I mean 2018? But it's going to be a busy schedule in November, playing pretty much every other night. I mean, that kind of goes back to what the Sharks experienced last season. And we talked about COVID and protocols and not playing their first home game for a month in, thinking they were going to have to start home games in Arizona. All that was bizarre. But another part that nobody really talks about was the workload of games. When you're playing every other night, you are not really getting an opportunity to have practice days in between, rest or proper recuperation. An NHL schedule, yeah, they can play even back-to-back nights. That's fine. But they got to get 2 nights off somewhere else, totally reset, get a practice day in there. So November and April are the busy months. If you just glance at the calendar, you can see they're dotted up pretty much once every other night. So it's a busy stretch in the second month and the final month of the season for the Sharks. And then the other biggest theme here is, quite honestly, the rest of this Pacific Division, which we didn't see, entirely last year. And now this year, it gets a little bit different, that the Desert Dogs, I would play the sound effect, but it would stop my presentation here. The Desert Dogs are out, right, with 32 teams because the Kraken are coming in the division. So I've divided this into groups. The SoCal teams, the Western Canadian teams, and I'm still calling the Las Vegas Golden Knights, not the Vegas Golden Knights, the Las Vegas Golden Knights expansion-ish, right? But Las Vegas and Seattle, and what are the Kraken going to be like? If it's Golden Knights 2.0, this division is in trouble. That's unfair, by the way. If the Kraken turn out to be like the Golden Knights, I mean, how is the league? I don't think they're going to expand beyond 32 anytime soon. That's already a lot. So they won't have to deal with this. But these teams are going to sit, for the next 5 years and say, look what we've had to deal with. The Edmontons, the Calgarys, the Vancouvers, Kings, Sharks, and Ducks. I mean, it's frustrating enough to have the Golden Knights handpick, cherry pick. But I'll say this, if you think right now, well, the Kraken don't appear to be the same team. You sure about that? Because were you saying that the Golden Knights were going to be really good this time, 5 years ago? Were you saying that? No, nobody was. Until their season started, they didn't lose a bunch, and they went all the way to the Stanley Cup final in year 1. Yikes. Now, if the Kraken do that, I don't want to say what I'll do. Anyway, how stacked is the rest of this division? You know what? The Kings and Ducks have been working really hard on their pipelines. Vancouver, just every time they seem to turn a corner, they also seem to take a step back. And realistically, with who Edmonton has on the team and what Calgary should be on a regular basis, I've always thought that those three teams were underperforming, but therein lies the problem. It's only a matter of time before they get a season right, or two of three of those teams, or all three of those teams get a season right. And then you've already got Las Vegas in there. And how soon are the Kings and Ducks, the trio of California powerhouse that it used to be? Think about what this division used to look like. If you'd come in from out east, you would get hammered by the Kings, Ducks, and Sharks. They used to call it the California Gauntlet. Did I say that right? Gauntlet. Gauntlet. Why did I say that word? Now I got problems with it. Gauntlet. All right. But clearly it's not that same level of difficulty anymore. So the rest of this division, I'm just going to say, probably hasn't been the strongest over the years. I would not expect that to last too much longer.